New York was diving into evening life. The skyscrapers gleamed with hundreds of lights. Cars weaved through the streets, reflecting in the wet asphalt. After a recent rain, people were walking along the streets, some hurrying home from work, others just heading out for meetings. On the corner of Fifth Avenue stood the restaurant Elegance, a place where influential people gathered here. Multimillion dollar deals were discussed, contracts were signed, alliances were formed. This restaurant was a symbol of status. Getting a table without a reservation was nearly impossible. Inside, luxury reigned, soft, warm lighting, elegant tables with white tablecloths, each with a candle in a refined holder. A jazz quartet played faintly, creating an atmosphere of sophisticated evening vibes. Sylvester Stallone walked into the restaurant alone, without security or an entourage. A dark jacket, jeans, light stubble. He looked nothing like his usual media appearance. He had just returned from a business meeting, and the only thing on his mind at that moment was a quiet dinner. His life was filled with meetings, negotiations, premieres, but tonight he just wanted to sit at a table, order his favorite dish, and enjoy the evening. He glanced around the room. There were almost no free tables. However, one by the window was empty. Without hesitation, he headed there. Bad preconceptions. Behind the bar waitress, Jenna was closely watching everything happening in the hall. She saw the man enter the restaurant, immediately drawing her attention. He looked familiar, but she didn't recognize him right away. But what caught her attention was something else. He sat at that table. This table was reserved for regular clients, including millionaire Henry Waldman, who came here every Thursday. Oh no, another upstart who thinks he's welcome here, Jenna thought, tightening her grip on the tray. She had worked at Elegance for 5 years and had seen enough arrogant people trying to act like they owned the place. She hated such guests. But this time she decided not to act immediately. Maybe he'd realize his mistake and move to another table himself. But no, he sat back, casually browsing the menu. Jenna pursed her lips. She already knew this evening was going to be ruined. The order, a young waiter named Matt, approached the table. He was always polite, though sometimes too nervous around important guests. Good evening, sir. What would you like to order? Sylvester smiled. Good evening. What's your signature dish today? We recommend the Wagyu steak with truffle mashed potatoes, or the black sea bass with saffron sauce. Sylvester thought for a moment. I'll have the steak and a glass of red wine, something from a good year. Matt nodded. Excellent choice, sir. He quickly noted the order and headed to the kitchen. Jenna saw the scene and barely managed to keep herself from going over there right away. Damn, she muttered. Matt returned to the bar. What's wrong with you? Jenna asked. What, you just took an order from the guy sitting at Waldman's table? Matt looked at her, confused. So what was I supposed to do, kick him out? Exactly, Matt shrugged uncertainly. Look, he's being calm. Maybe he really is an important client. He's just a random visitor who thinks he can sit anywhere. But I feel like I've seen him somewhere. I think so too, but that doesn't matter. He took someone else's seat. Matt wanted to say something, but changed his mind. Jenna was no longer going to wait. She straightened up, grabbed her order notebook, and decisively headed for the table. The first confrontation. Good evening, sir, she said with a forced smile. Sylvester looked up. Good evening. Have you already placed your order? Yes, your colleague wrote it down. Great, but there's a little problem. And what's that? This seat is reserved for our regular clients. Sylvester raised an eyebrow in surprise. Seriously? Yes. And if you don't mind, I'll offer you another table. He thoughtfully rubbed his chin. Honestly, I like it here. It's not about whether you like it, it's the restaurant's rule. But the table was free. Jenna felt her patience starting to wear thin. It doesn't matter. Strange, because it does matter to me. Jenna was about to say something sharp when the waiter brought the steak. Your order, sir, he said, placing a plate in front of Sylvester. The aroma of tender meat spread through the room. Sylvester smiled and picked up the knife. Thank you. He cut a piece and savored it. Jenna was in despair. She had two options: immediately throw him out, risking causing a scene, wait for him to finish, then deal with him. She chose the second option, but she didn't know that the worst shock of her life was yet to come. Jenna stood by the bar, trying to control her anger. She watched as that arrogant man, whoever he was, calmly ate his steak and didn't even seem to consider moving from the prime spot. She couldn't figure out what seemed familiar about him: dark hair, strong build, confident movements. It was like she had seen him somewhere before, but where Matt was also watching the table, but with a different expression. On his face, he no longer looked so sure that Jenna was right. "Listen," he said, quietly approaching her. "What if he's actually someone important?" Jenna scoffed. "If he were important, he'd know the rules of our restaurant. What if he does know them?" She shot him a dirty look. "What do you mean?" Matt shrugged. "Well, he's acting too calm. Doesn't seem like someone who just randomly walked in and decided to show off." Jenna ignored his words and kept staring at the stranger. She had already figured out how to approach him again and force him to move to another table. But before she could do that, the restaurant door opened, and the last person she wanted to see right now walked in: Henry Waldman. Jenna froze, holding her breath as Henry Waldman entered the restaurant, a tall, distinguished man in his 60s with perfectly combed gray hair and a flawlessly tailored suit. He was someone everyone in the place knew. As soon as Waldman appeared in the door, the staff tensed, and guests respectfully looked away, allowing him to walk to his table unhindered. But this time something was off. His table was taken. He paused for a moment, shrugging off his coat, and looked toward the corner, where in his usual spot a man was sitting. Jenna noticed how his gaze changed for a second from surprise to recognition, and then to a smile. Jenna couldn't believe her eyes. Henry Waldman was smiling. He didn't shout, didn't demand that the arrogant guest be removed from his spot. No, instead, he slowly walked toward the table, even slightly straightening his shoulders, as if he was glad to see someone. And the man at the table, the same arrogant man who had been dining so calmly and wasn't planning to move, also looked up. And then something even stranger happened. He smiled to Henry. He exclaimed warmly, setting down his knife and napkin. "Sly." Waldman replied just as warmly, opening his arms for a friendly hug. Jenna almost dropped the tray. "Sly." The men shook hands firmly, and then Henry lightly patted the stranger on the shoulder. "Didn't know you'd be here today." "I didn't know you'd be here either, Henry." Well, are you now taking my favorite spot?" "Oh, I just didn't know it was yours. But it's a good spot, can't argue." With that, both of them laughed. Jenna stood there stunned, watching the scene unfold. This arrogant man knew Henry Waldman. What's more, they were obviously friends. Matt, who was standing nearby, also looked stunned. "Oh, damn," he whispered. Jenna swallowed hard. Her heart was racing. Who the hell was this man? The truth revealed. Jenna finally gathered the courage to approach. She was stunned, but her professional pride wouldn't let her stand idly. Excuse me, sir," she addressed Waldman. "Do you know this man?" Henry looked at her as if she had asked whether water was. "What, are you kidding? That's Sylvester Stallone." The whole restaurant seemed to freeze. Matt coughed, and Jenna felt her legs turn to jelly. Sylvester Stallone, the Hollywood legend, the man everyone knew, even those who hadn't seen his movies, and she had just yelled at him. Her face turned crimson. Stallone calmly looked at her, his expression showing neither anger nor annoyance. On the contrary, he seemed intrigued. Jenna swallowed. "I didn't know, sir." Stallone leaned back in his chair and smiled easily. "It's all good, Miss Jenna," she managed to say. "Jenna," he repeated, savoring her name. "You were just doing your job." Her cheeks burned. Henry laughed and raised his wine glass. "Jenna, do you know who owns this restaurant?" She weakly shook her head. "Well," Waldman paused, building the suspense. "You're standing in front of its owner." Jenna felt the floor fall out from under her. She had yelled at the owner of the restaurant. Matt slowly stepped back, as if afraid he'd be dragged into this too. Stallone tilted his head, watching her reaction. "So you really got upset that I sat at this table, huh?" Jenna blinked, unsure of how to respond. I just wanted to follow the rules, sir." "That's good." He smiled. "But there's one problem." She tensed. "I make the rules here." Jenna felt her chest tighten. Sylvester looked at Henry, then back at her. "Tell me, Jenna, do you like your job?" She stayed silent. Henry sighed and raised his hand. "Don't torture her, Sly. The girl's really trying." Stallone nodded. "That's good. But you know what I want to say?" Jenna could barely breathe. "I have a proposal for you, Matt." And the other waiters froze, watching the scene unfold. Stallone leaned forward, his eyes sparkling. "If you're so strict about following the rules, maybe you should become the manager of this place." Jenna's mouth opened, but no words came out. "What? Well, you're already managing the staff, and it seems like you've got the guts to yell at even me." Henry laughed. "Oh, that was a sight." Jenna felt her heart leap out of her chest. She didn't know what to say. She had just gotten promoted. Jenna stood silently, still not fully understanding what had just happened. Her breathing was uneven, but at the same time, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. Everyone around was still watching her, and her thoughts were scattered in all directions. The restaurant manager? She never even dreamed of it. Just a few minutes ago, her heart was torn with shame over her actions, and now it was a reality. But was she ready for this? Sylvester seemed to notice her hesitation. He smiled and looked at her closely, as though waiting for her reaction. Jenna, don't worry. I know this might seem strange, but you're not afraid to take responsibility, and I like that. And trust me, I'm not as scary as I seem, he said, wiping his hands with the napkin on the table. Jenna still couldn't believe her ears. She looked like someone who had just woken up from a nightmare, but was forced to stay in this world and accept the unexpected offer. Waldman, who had been watching the situation from the side, also smiled and licked his lips. Sly, you're the real deal. The real deal, he said. I'll tell you, Jenna, I've been working here from day one. And what he's offering right now, it's a chance for you. He knows how this restaurant works, and knowing his style, you can be sure you'll get all the support you need. Sylvester laughed and placed his hand on Henry's shoulder. Don't test me like that. I'm not that heartless, he said with a smile. Jenna was in a daze, but this new opportunity was something she couldn't ignore. If someone had told her a few hours ago that she'd become the manager of the restaurant, she would have laughed and thought it was a bad joke. And now everything seemed completely real. Her gaze fell on the menu that was scattered across the table. I don't know what to say. This is too much for me, but I promise I'll do my best to handle this role, she finally responded, gathering her strength. Sylvester tilted his head and gave a slight nod. One more thing, Jenna, he continued. You always have to remember that this restaurant isn't just a business for me. It's something more. And if you want to be part of it, you need to understand that here we value not just rules, but also the heart. Jenna smiled, realizing that she wasn't just going to work in a restaurant. She was going to become part of its spirit, which flowed through every dish, every guest, and every employee. I understand, sir, she said, feeling the new path ahead of her begin to take shape. A few days later, Jenna was already settling into her new role. At first, everything was difficult, but gradually, she learned how to manage the team and implement changes that became evident in every aspect of the restaurant's operation. She felt like she was part of this small empire. She earned the respect of her colleagues, and Sylvester, surprisingly, remained approachable and ready to support her when necessary. A few months later, the restaurant became even more popular, and Jenna was not only managing, but actively introducing new ideas to improve service and atmosphere. While her workdays were filled with challenges, she could feel that the Real Challenge was just beginning. She was no longer just a waitress in a big restaurant where strangers tried to control her life. Now, she was part of something important. Her heart raced with new opportunities, and while she still couldn't believe she was on this path, one thing was clear. Her life had changed forever. Sylvester looked at her a few months after the incident. I'm glad I wasn't wrong about you, Jenna, he said with a slight smile. You're a real leader. Jenna smiled in response, proud of herself. This is just the beginning, Sly.